The bridge of the Eternal Vigil hummed with quiet efficiency. Day sat at his tactical station, fingers moving across the holographic display as he ran another combat simulation. The green glow reflected off his face while he studied attack patterns and defensive formations. Around him, the alien crew members worked at their own stations, tall and armored figures that made him look small by comparison. He spotted something in the simulation, a weakness in the standard defensive grid. If an enemy came from this angle, they could break through easily. He ran the numbers again to be sure, then raised his hand. "Commander Rixal," they said, "I have a suggestion for the patrol route." The first officer turned his massive head. His species, the Vrin, stood over 8 feet tall with natural armor plating covering their bodies. Rixal looked down at the human with barely concealed annoyance. "Speak, human." Day brought up his analysis on the main screen. "If we adjust our formation by 30 degrees and rotate the scanner array, we can cover the blind spot near the asteroid field. Right now, someone could hide there and we wouldn't see them until too late." Rixal studied the display for exactly 3 seconds before dismissing it. Humans lack the combat heritage to understand true warfare. The Coalition has used this formation for 200 years. It has proven effective. "But sir, the mathematics show, Lieutenant Day." Captain Valthorax's deep voice cut through the bridge. The captain stood from his command chair, his armor gleaming under the lights. "Your enthusiasm is noted. However, we must follow protocol. The Coalition's methods have kept peace for 3 centuries. Day wanted to argue. He wanted to explain that just because something worked for 3 centuries didn't mean it was perfect. But he had learned in his 2 years aboard the Eternal Vigil that arguing only made things worse. The aliens saw humans as children playing at being soldiers. "Yes, yes, sir," he said quietly and turned back to his station dot in the engineering section below. Hana wiped sweat from her forehead as she finished adjusting the power distribution system. The engine core hummed smoother now, more efficient. She had spent 3 weeks developing this modification, and the results were perfect. Energy output had increased by 23% while reducing heat waste. She called up to the chief engineer. "The modifications are complete. We should implement them across all engine systems." The Vrin engineer lumbered over, his heavy footsteps echoing on the metal floor. He studied her work carefully, running his own diagnostics. Finally, he nodded. "Impressive for a human. I will submit this to the Engineering Council for review." "Review?" Hannah tried to keep the frustration from her voice. "The testing is complete. The data is solid. We could install this today. Protocol requires council approval for all major system changes. We will have an answer in 6 to 8 weeks. 6 to 8 weeks. Hannah wanted to scream. This wasn't some untested theory. She had proven it worked. But because she was human, because her species was classified as protected, every idea she had needed approval from her alien supervisors. She made her way to the mess hall where Day was already sitting with his meal. She dropped into the seat across from him heavily. "Let me guess," Day said. "They loved your work but need to review it first?" 8 weeks, Hannah said. 8 weeks to approve something I proved works today. Rixal shot down my tactical suggestion in 3 seconds. They sat in silence for a moment, eating their food. Around them, Vrin crew members talked and laughed. The humans were tolerated, even liked, but never quite treated as equals. "Sometimes I wonder why they even let us join the Coalition," Hana said softly. "Because we begged them to," they replied. Earth wanted to be part of something bigger. We wanted to explore the stars with others instead of alone. We just didn't realize they'd treat us like we need constant supervision. Their conversation was interrupted by an alert. Both of them stood immediately, trained reflexes kicking in. Day's communication device crackled with the captain's voice. All crew to stations. We have received a distress call. Day ran to the bridge, taking his position at tactical. The main screen showed a civilian transport ship surrounded by smaller attack vessels. Even from this distance, he could see the transport was taking heavy damage. Status report, Captain Veltherax commanded. Crash raiders, they said, reading his screens. 6 attack ships. They're hitting the transport's engines and life support. Captain, that ship has maybe an hour of air left. How many civilians aboard? Sensors show 347 life signs. The captain's expression hardened. Battle stations. All human personnel report to protected sections immediately. Day stayed at his station. Sir, I'm the tactical officer. I need to be here. Lieutenant, this is not a debate. Coalition protocol states clearly that humans must be removed from combat situations for their own safety. But Captain, that is an order. Day felt his jaw clench, but he nodded. He started to leave his station when something on his sensors caught his eye. He paused, studying the readings more carefully. His blood ran cold. Captain, he said urgently, the raiders are just a distraction. Explain. Look at their pattern. They're keeping the transport alive, not destroying it. They're using it as bait. And sir, I'm detecting unusual gravitational distortions behind us. Rixal checked his own sensors. I see nothing. Because you're looking for active vessels, they said, his fingers flying across his controls. I'm looking for spaces where there should be stars but aren't. Something is blocking the light. Something big. He routed his data to the main screen. The computer highlighted 3 areas behind the Eternal Vigil where the star field didn't quite match what it should be. Cloaked ships, they said. 3 of them. Dreadnought class based on the displacement. Captain, this isn't a raid. It's an ambush. The moment we engage those raiders, the dreadnoughts will decloak behind us and cut us off. The bridge fell silent. Every alien crew member stared at the human, who had just spotted something their advanced sensors had missed. Captain Veltherax studied the data. His tactical experience told him the human was right. The pattern was there once you knew to look for it. But how had they seen it? How had this human, from a species classified as needing protection, spotted a threat that his veteran crew had missed? How long until they attack? The captain asked. Based on their positions in our current course, 3 minutes. Maybe less. 3 minutes. Not enough time to call for reinforcements. Not enough time to run. Standard coalition protocol would have them follow the distress call right into a trap, and everyone aboard both ships would die. The captain looked at his tactical officer. This small human with no armor, from a species the coalition had classified as fragile. But there was nothing fragile about the certainty in Day's eyes. Lieutenant, the captain said slowly, what would you do? Day met his captain's gaze. This was the first time in 2 years that anyone had asked him that question. Not what does protocol say, not what have we done before, but what would you do? He took a breath and told them. When he finished explaining his plan, Commander Rixal's voice cut through the bridge like a blade. That is insane. You would have us deliberately fly into an asteroid field, detonate our own weapons, and navigate through debris traveling at near light speed. No coalition captain would approve such recklessness. No coalition captain would survive the next 3 minutes either. Day said calmly. Captain Veltherax stood from his chair. Every eye on the bridge watched him. 300 years of protocol and tradition on one side. The word of a human officer on the other. All stations, the captain said clearly. Lieutenant Day has tactical command. Execute on his orders. The bridge erupted in protest from several officers. But the captain's word was final. He looked at Day and said 5 words that changed everything. Show us how humans fight. Day's hands moved across his console with practice speed. 2 minutes and 30 seconds until the trap closed. He opened communication channels to specific crew members, bypassing the normal chain of command. Hannah, I need engine output at 140%. Down in engineering, Hannah's eyes widened. 140% was beyond every safety margin in the book. The engines might tear themselves apart. But she heard something in Day's voice that she recognized. They had trained together on Earth, survived combat simulations that other species considered too brutal to be useful. She knew that tone. He had a plan, and he needed her to trust him. "Give me 30 seconds, she said. "Quan," Day continued, connecting to the pilot. "I'm sending you a course through the asteroid field. You'll be flying through debris, moving at 0.7 light speed." Quan studied the course data and whistled. "That's considered impossible by Coalition standards. Good thing we're not from the Coalition. Can you do it?" A pause. Then Quan's voice came back with a grin in it. "Send me the data. Dr. Nari, medical teams to sections 4 through 9. We're going to take hits." Nari didn't ask questions. She just started mobilizing her teams. That was something about humans that the aliens didn't understand yet. When the situation turned bad, humans didn't debate. They acted. They looked at the main screen showing the tactical situation. The crash raiders were still hitting the civilian transport, keeping it damaged enough to be helpless, but alive enough to be bait. Behind the eternal vigil, 3 massive shapes were slowly moving into position. In 90 seconds, they would decloak and open fire. "Captain," they said, "I need you to trust me completely. What I'm about to do will look wrong. It will feel wrong. But I need you to let me finish." Valtharax gripped his command chair. Every instinct told him to take back control, to follow the protocols he had trusted for decades. But he looked at the countdown timer and made his choice. "The ship is yours, Lieutenant. All weapons, prepare to fire on my mark. Target the asteroids, not the enemy ships." Rixal's voice was sharp with disbelief. "You would waste our weapons on rocks?" "I'm not wasting them. I'm using them. Every torpedo loads now." The weapons officer, a Vryn veteran of 30 battles, looked at his captain. Valtharax nodded. Slowly, reluctantly, the officer began loading every torpedo tube the ship had. They designated specific asteroids on his display, calculating trajectories and blast patterns. The computer warned him that his plan had a 97% chance of catastrophic failure. He ignored it. Coalition computers were programmed for Coalition tactics. What he was about to do wasn't in their programming. "Hannah, engine status? 140% and holding." "Day, I don't know how long I can maintain this." "You'll know when to push it harder. Trust me, 60 seconds." The cloaked dreadnoughts were almost in position. The raiders intensified their attack on the transport. They knew they were running out of time. "Quan, come to heading 273, full speed." The ship banked hard. Several crew members grabbed their stations as the turn pushed them against their restraints. The Vryn were built solid, but even they felt the force of that maneuver. "Sir," Rixal protested, "that heading takes us directly into the asteroid field." "Exactly," they said calmly. "We'll be destroyed." "Not if Quan is as good as he says he is." "Quan, I'm better than I say I am," the pilot replied, and sent the eternal vigil screaming toward the densest part of the asteroid field. 30 seconds. The asteroids grew larger on the screen. Some were the size of buildings. Some were the size of mountains. And they were all moving at speeds that would crush the ship like paper. All weapons fire on designated targets. Now, torpedoes launched. Dozens of them, spreading out in a pattern that looked random but was anything but. They struck asteroids throughout the field. The explosions created chain reactions, asteroids colliding with asteroids, breaking apart into thousands of pieces. "Are you mad?" Rixall shouted. "You've just created a debris field we can't possibly navigate." "That's not for us," they said. 10 seconds. "Quan, get ready." The Eternal Vigil plunged into the asteroid field. Quan's hands danced across his controls, making adjustments faster than any coalition pilot would think possible. The ship twisted, rolled, and dove through gaps that appeared and disappeared in fractions of a second. Asteroids, the size of buildings, passed so close to the hull that sensors screamed warnings. Behind them, the 3 crashed dreadnoughts decloaked right on schedule. Their weapons powered up, locking on to where the Eternal Vigil should have been. But the ship wasn't there. It was diving through an asteroid field, doing something no sane captain would attempt. The crash commander didn't hesitate. He sent his dreadnoughts forward in pursuit. That was his mistake. "Now, Hannah," they said quietly. "Everything you've got." Hannah pushed the engines past 140, past 150, into ranges that turned her console red with warnings. The ship accelerated so fast that even the artificial gravity struggled to compensate. And then they were through, bursting out the other side of the asteroid field. The crashed dreadnoughts entered the field behind them. But while Quan had navigated through with precision, they were trying to charge through with brute force. And the debris field they had created was still expanding, still colliding, still breaking into smaller and smaller pieces. "Quan, emergency stop. Spin us 180 degrees." The pilot did something that should have ripped the ship apart. He threw the engines into full reverse while spinning the ship using maneuvering thrusters. For 3 seconds, every person on board felt like they were being torn in half. Then they were facing back toward the asteroid field. "All weapons. Fire everything at Sector 7 Alpha." "Sir." "There's nothing there but asteroids," the weapons officer said. "Trust the human," Captain Veltherax said firmly. The weapons officer fired. Torpedoes and energy weapons slammed into the asteroid field at precisely the point where the 3 dreadnoughts were fighting through the debris. The impacts created another cascade of destruction. Asteroids that were already unstable from the first detonations now exploded into clouds of rock and metal. The first crashed dreadnought took a direct hit from an asteroid, the size of a city block. Its shields failed. Its hull cracked. And then the chain reaction hit it. Thousands of smaller impacts overwhelming what was left of its defenses. The dreadnought broke apart. The second dreadnought tried to turn back, but it was too late. The debris field had expanded around it. It died slower than the first, battered to pieces by 1,000 cutting impacts. The third dreadnought managed to escape back the way it came, fleeing into open space with its hull scarred and systems failing. On the bridge of the Eternal Vigil, silence filled the room. They had just destroyed 2 dreadnoughts and routed a third using a tactic that no coalition officer would have even considered. And they had done it in less than 3 minutes. Day was already working his console, checking for more threats. "Captain, the raiders are breaking off. They're retreating without their support. The civilian transport is secure." Captain Veltherax slowly sat back in his command chair. He had commanded ships for 40 years. He had fought in 17 major engagements. He had never seen anything like what just happened. Casualties. He asked. Dr. Nari's voice came through the communication system. "Minor injuries throughout the ship. Nothing critical." "We were lucky." "That wasn't luck," Rixall said quietly. Every head turned toward him. The first officer who had dismissed Day's ideas, who had called humans too primitive to understand warfare, now stared at the tactical officer with something like awe. That was precision. That was planning. That was... He struggled for the word. Brilliant. Day felt his face flush. "Just doing my job, sir." "No," Captain Veltherax said, standing from his chair and walking to Day's station. You did far more than your job. You saved 847 lives today. 347 civilians on that transport. 500 officers and crew on this ship, including mine. The captain placed one massive hand on Day's shoulder. It was a gesture of respect among the Vryn, reserved for warriors who had proven themselves in battle. You disregarded direct orders to leave the bridge. Yes, sir, Day said. I'll submit myself for discipline. You broke protocol in 7 different ways. Yes, sir. You risked the ship on a plan that had a 97% chance of failure. The computer doesn't know everything. Sir, Captain Veltharax was quiet for a moment. Then, to everyone's surprise, he laughed. It was a deep, rumbling sound that echoed through the bridge. No, the captain said. The computer does not know everything. And neither do we. He looked around at his crew. For 300 years, the Coalition has maintained peace through careful protocol and proven tactics. Those methods kept us safe. But they also made us predictable. The Kresh knew exactly what we would do because we always do the same thing. He looked back at Day. Humans are not predictable. Humans do not follow the safe path. Humans calculate the odds and then ignore them if there is a better way. Today, Lieutenant Day showed us that sometimes the best way forward is the way we never considered. Sir, Rixall said carefully, this will need to be reported to Fleet Command. Yes, the captain agreed. And what do you think they will say? News traveled fast through the Coalition fleet. Within hours, every ship in the sector knew what had happened. A human tactical officer had saved a Vryn dreadnought by breaking every rule in the manual and succeeding where protocol would have failed. The response split the Coalition down the middle. Some species saw potential in humanity. They looked at the battle reports and realized that humans brought something new to their ancient alliance. Something unpredictable and powerful. But others saw only danger. They argued that humans were too reckless, too willing to take risks that endangered everyone around them. The careful order that had kept peace for 3 centuries was being threatened. A formal inquiry was launched. Not to honor Lieutenant Day, but to determine if humans should face even greater restrictions. Some voices in the Coalition Council called for humans to be removed from military service entirely. Aboard the Eternal Vigil, Day sat in his quarters reading the reports. Hannah leaned against the doorway, her arms crossed. They're actually debating whether to kick us out, she said. After you saved all those lives. They're afraid, Day replied. We don't fit into their system. Everything they've built is based on following rules and trusting proven methods. We showed them that sometimes you need to throw out the rules. So what do? We wait, and we keep doing our jobs. Eventually, they'll have to decide what's more important, their comfort or their survival. The decision came faster than expected, but not in the way anyone thought. Fleet intelligence intercepted Kresh communications. They were planning something big. The target was Tarak Station, the headquarters of the entire sector's defense coordination. 50,000 civilians lived there, along with the command staff that directed 12 defensive fleets. If Tarak fell, 36 systems would be vulnerable to attack. The Coalition assembled every available ship for the station's defense. 32 capital ships, hundreds of support vessels, and thousands of fighters. It was the largest defensive fleet assembled in 50 years. The Eternal Vigil received its orders with the rest of the fleet. They were assigned to the rear guard, far from the actual fighting. Captain Veltharax immediately filed a protest. But the fleet commander's response was clear. Humans were too unpredictable to be trusted in the main battle line. It's not a punishment, Commander Rixall explained as they reviewed the orders. They're afraid of what might happen if we break formation during a major battle. They're making a mistake, Day said, studying the tactical displays. The rear guard won't see any action unless the entire fleet fails. They're wasting our experience. But orders were orders. The Eternal Vigil took its position at the back of the formation and began the journey to Tarak Station. During the 3-day voyage, something interesting happened. The human crew didn't just sit idle. They studied. They pulled every crash engagement from the past century, analyzing tactics and patterns. Dr. Nari researched crash psychology and culture. Hana examined technical specifications of their ships. Quan ran simulations of attack patterns that coalition tacticians considered too risky to attempt. On the second day, they gathered in one of the ship's briefing rooms. They had filled the walls with data displays and tactical maps. The other human crew members joined him, along with several Vrin officers who had grown curious about what the humans were doing. The Kresh don't just attack, they explained, pointing to battle reports. They terrorize. Every engagement follows the same pattern. They make an overwhelming show of force. They broadcast the destruction they cause, and they leave survivors to spread fear. It's psychological warfare. Dr. Nari added, their culture values fear as a tool of control. They believe an enemy who is afraid has already lost. That's why coalition tactics keep failing, Hana said, bringing up ship diagrams. We defend carefully and wait for them to commit. But they're not trying to win through strategy. They're trying to win through terror. And every time we respond predictably, we prove that their terror is working. So what's the counter? Asked one of the Vrin officers. They smiled. You don't fight fear with caution. You fight it with something the Kresh don't expect, which is aggression. The Vrin officers looked uncomfortable. Aggression wasn't part of coalition doctrine. The entire military philosophy was built on defensive positioning and measured response. To attack aggressively was to abandon 3 centuries of proven tactics. But Commander Rixal, who had once dismissed human ideas, now leaned forward with interest. Explain. For the next hour, the humans laid out what they had learned. The Kresh ships had powerful shields, but weak point defense systems. Their formations were designed to look overwhelming, but had structural weaknesses. Their psychological reliance on fear meant they didn't plan well for enemies who fought back with equal ferocity. We've been fighting them wrong, they concluded. We treat them like a military force. But they're raiders who happen to have warships. And raiders don't know what to do when their victims become hunters. By the time they reached Tarak Station, the humans had developed a complete analysis of Kresh tactics and vulnerabilities. They tried to share it with Fleet Command, but the response was polite dismissal. The coalition had its own intelligence, services, and didn't need input from junior officers, especially not human officers. The fleet took up defensive positions around Tarak Station. The formation was textbook perfect. Every ship in its designated spot, every field of fire calculated, every escape route planned. It was a defensive masterpiece that represented 300 years of military science. Day sat at his tactical station in the rear guard and watched the formation with growing dread. He could see what was going to happen. The crash would come with overwhelming numbers. The coalition fleet would hold position and fight defensively. The battle would drag on. And eventually, the crash would bring out whatever super weapon they had prepared and destroy the station while the fleet was still following protocol. You see it too, Hana said quietly over a private channel. Yeah, they replied. This is going to be bad. The crash arrived 6 hours later. But they didn't come with a fleet. They came with an armada. 30 capital ships. Hundreds of raiders. And at the center, something that made every sensor on every coalition ship scream warnings. It was a mobile fortress. A converted asteroid bristling with weapons. Energy readings suggested it was charging some kind of super weapon. And it was pointed directly at Tarak Station. The coalition fleet commander ordered standard defensive formations. Hold position. Protect the station. Wait for the enemy to commit their forces, then counterattack. Exactly what the Kresh expected. Day watched his tactical display and ran the numbers. The Kresh would send their raiders first in wave attacks. The coalition fleet would focus on defending against them. Meanwhile, that super weapon would charge. When it fired, the station and everyone on it would be destroyed. After that, the coalition fleet would be trapped between the Kresh armada and the debris field of what used to be Tarak Station. They would lose. Not because they weren't strong enough, but because they were following a playbook the enemy had already read. He opened a secure channel to Captain Veltharax. "Sir, request permission to speak freely." "Granted, Lieutenant. They're going to kill everyone at that station. We need to break formation." There was a long pause. "We have our orders, Lieutenant." The fleet commander has 300 years of combined experience among his staff. "Surely they see what you see." "Sir, with respect, they see what protocol tells them to see. They see a defensive scenario that matches their training. They don't see what I see. And what do you see? A trap, a distraction, and 50,000 people about to die because we're too afraid to do something different." Another pause. "What would you have us do?" Day took a deep breath. "Let me break formation. Give me the Eternal Vigil and 2 escort frigates. We punch through their armada and destroy that super weapon before it can fire. That's suicide. That's war, sir. Real war. Not the kind the coalition has been practicing for 3 centuries. The kind where you accept risk because the alternative is worse." Captain Veltharax sat in his command chair and thought about Lieutenant Day, this human who had already proven himself brilliant. This officer from a species classified as needing protection. This tactician who had saved 800 lives by breaking every rule. "If I authorize this," the captain said slowly, "Fleet Command will have both our careers. We'll be breaking formation in the middle of a major battle. We'll be abandoning our assigned position. We'll be risking a capital ship on an unauthorized assault." "Yes, sir. And you believe this is the only way to save those 50,000 civilians?" "I know it is, sir." The captain looked at Commander Rixall. The first officer nodded once. He had been skeptical of humans before, but he had watched them work. He had seen what they could do. And he had learned that sometimes the impossible was simply something no one else had tried yet. "Very well," Captain Veltharax said. "You'll have your strike force. But Lieutenant Day, understand this. If you fail, we all die. The strike force, this ship, and everyone on that station. And if we follow protocol?" Day asked. The captain was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled grimly. "We die anyway. At least your way. We die trying something new." Day nodded. "That's all humans ever ask for, sir. A chance to try." The strike force launched before Fleet Command could countermand the order. 3 ships against an armada. The Eternal Vigil in the lead, flanked by 2 escort frigates. They accelerated away from the defensive formation, heading straight toward the heart of the Kresh fleet. Every ship in the coalition fleet watched them go. Some captains called it brave. Others called it suicide. The fleet commander called it mutiny and promised courts-martial for everyone involved. But none of them moved to stop the strike force. Deep down, they all knew the humans might be right. On the bridge of the Eternal Vigil, they pulled up the tactical display. The Kresh armada spread before them like a wall of death. 30 capital ships, 200 raiders, and at the center, the mobile fortress with its super weapon charging to full power. Energy readings suggested they had maybe 15 minutes before it could fire. "Quan," they said calmly, "take us in. Maximum speed." The pilot grinned and pushed the engines. The ship leaped forward, accelerating to speeds the Coalition safety regulations forbade inside combat zones. Behind them, the two frigates struggled to keep up. "Hannah, how are the engines?" Down in engineering, Hannah was already rerouting power systems. Life support was cut to minimum levels. Crew quarters went dark. Even the gravity plating was reduced to save energy. Every watt of power was channeled to shields and weapons. "We're held together by hope and some very creative engineering," she replied. "But we'll get you where you need to go." That's all I need to hear. The crash saw them coming. How could they not? 3 ships charging directly at an armada was either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. The raider ships moved to intercept, forming a screen between the strike force and the mobile fortress. "Weapons range in 30 seconds, reported the weapons officer. "Don't shoot," they ordered. "Sir?" "Not yet. Let them think we're insane but not dangerous." The raiders opened fire first. Energy beams and projectiles filled the space between the two forces. But Quan was already moving, weaving the eternal vigil through the incoming fire with precision that defied explanation. Shots that should have hit missed by meters. Missiles locked on to positions where the ship had been seconds ago, but wasn't anymore. The Vrin crew had never seen piloting like this. Coalition doctrine taught smooth, calculated movements. Quan flew like he was dancing with death and enjoying every second of it. "Now," they said quietly, the eternal vigil opened fire. But not at the raiders in front of them. They had calculated firing solutions that used the crushed ship's own formations against them. Torpedoes curved around friendly vessels and struck raiders from unexpected angles. Energy beams refracted off shields to hit other ships. It was chaos, but calculated chaos. 3 raiders died in the first salvo. 2 more were crippled. The rest broke formation, confused by an attack pattern they had never encountered before. "They're scattering," Commander Rixall said with satisfaction. "They don't know how to respond." "That's because Coalition ships don't attack like this," they replied. "We're not supposed to be aggressive. We're not supposed to take risks. We're supposed to hold position and defend." They've been fighting the Coalition for years. They've never fought humans. The strike force punched through the raider screen. Now they faced the capital ships. These were serious warships with heavy armor and powerful weapons. The Eternal Vigil was tough, but even she couldn't stand against focused fire from multiple dreadnoughts. "Escorts, break left and right. Draw their fire. We're going straight up the middle." The 2 frigates peeled away, their captains trusting the humans' plan even though it seemed like madness. They opened fire on the capital ships, offering themselves as targets. It worked. Half the crash fleet turned to engage them, but that meant the Eternal Vigil still faced 15 capital ships and the mobile fortress. Even with superior piloting and creative tactics, those were impossible odds. "Hannah," they said, "I need something from you that I have no right to ask for." In engineering, Hannah looked at her displays. She knew what he needed before he said it. "You want me to overload the engines." "Not overload. Push past overload. Into ranges that will probably destroy them." "Probably?" "Definitely. But we need the speed. We need to close with that fortress before they can bring all their weapons to bear." Hannah looked at her team. The human engineers and Vrin technicians who had worked alongside her for 2 years. They were all watching her, waiting for her decision. "Do it," one of the Vrin engineers said. "We trust you." Hannah smiled and started entering commands that made the computer scream warnings at her. "Day, you're going to get your speed. But after this, we'll need a new ship. This one won't make it home. Getting home is a problem for later. Right now, we just need to survive the next 10 minutes." The engines flared. The Eternal Vigil accelerated beyond anything the crash expected. One moment the ship was fighting through their lines. The next, it was past them, racing toward the mobile fortress while the capital ship struggled to turn and track. Alarms screamed across the ship. Hull plates stressed beyond their limits began to crack. Energy conduits overloaded. Several sections lost pressure and had to be sealed. Dr. Nari's medical teams rushed from one emergency to another, but they were getting closer. The mobile fortress grew on the screen, a massive construct of rock and metal and weapons. Its super weapon glowed with charging energy, pointed at Tarak's station like a spear aimed at the heart of the coalition. "Fortress is launching interceptors," reported the tactical officer. Hundreds of small attack craft poured from the fortress, forming a defensive screen. These weren't raiders. These were military-grade fighters piloted by Kresh warriors who knew exactly what they were doing. "Quan, can you get us through that?" The pilot studied the interceptor formation and laughed. It was not a sane laugh. "Coalition pilots can't. But I'm not from the coalition. Hold on to something." What followed was piloting that would be studied in military academies for decades. Quan threaded the eternal vigil through a cloud of interceptors that should have torn the ship apart. He flew in 3 dimensions, using the fortress's own gravity well to slingshot around obstacles. When interceptors got too close, he used the ship's mass to literally ram them aside, sacrificing armor plating for forward momentum. One of the escort frigates died. It took a direct hit from a capital ship and broke apart. But its sacrifice wasn't meaningless. It had drawn away enough of the Kresh fleet that the Eternal Vigil had a clear run at the fortress. "Weapons range in 10 seconds, the weapons officer said. His hands were steady on the controls, but his eyes were wide. They were too close. At this range, when they fired on the fortress, the explosion would likely destroy them too. "Captain," they said, "I need to tell you something." "I know, Lieutenant," Captain Veltharax replied calmly. "This is a one-way trip. You knew? I've commanded ships for 40 years. I can read a tactical situation. The moment I authorized this mission, I knew how it would end. But 50,000 civilians will live. That's worth one old captain and his ship." Around the bridge, the crew was silent. The Vryn officers understood what their captain had done. He had ordered them to their deaths. Not because he wanted to, but because someone had to. "Sir," they said quietly, "I have one more trick. But I need you to trust me completely. Lieutenant, I gave you command of my ship. I gave you the lives of everyone aboard. Trust was never in question. Quan, when I give the word, I need an emergency jump. Right here, right now, while we're in the gravity well of that fortress." Every head on the bridge turned to stare at him. Jumping this close to a massive gravitational source was suicide. The ship would be torn apart by tidal forces. It was prohibited by every regulation, forbidden by every safety protocol, and generally considered impossible. "That will kill us," Commander Rixall said flatly. "Maybe," they agreed. "Or maybe it just hasn't been done before because no one was desperate enough to try. Hannah, can you disable the jump drive safeties?" In engineering, Hannah was already doing it. "Done." This is insane." "I know. Trust me anyway." The Eternal Vigil entered weapons range. Every tube loaded. Every energy bank charged. And directly ahead, the mobile fortress with its super weapons seconds from firing. "All weapons," they commanded. "Fire everything. Target the super weapon core." The ship unleashed everything it had. Torpedoes, missiles, energy beams, mass drivers. Every weapon system fired simultaneously, a focused lance of destruction aimed at one point. The fortress's shields flickered, held, started to fail. "Jump now," they shouted. "Quan, jump." The pilot activated the jump drive. Reality twisted. The ship screamed in protest. And then they were gone. Behind them, The torpedoes hit. The superweapon core destabilized, and the mobile fortress detonated with enough force to destroy 17 crash capital ships that were too close to escape the blast. The crash armada broke. Without their superweapon and more than half their capital ships, they had no hope of victory. They scattered and fled into deep space. Tarak Station was saved. The coalition fleet was intact. And somewhere in the darkness between stars, the Eternal Vigil drifted. Heavily damaged but miraculously alive. In engineering, Hana stared at her consoles in disbelief. We jumped inside a gravity well. We shouldn't be alive. The Eternal Vigil limped back to Tarak Station 3 days later. The jump had worked, but barely. Half the ship was running on emergency power. Hull breaches had been patched with whatever materials the crew could find. The engines were completely destroyed, and the ship had to be towed the final distance by rescue vessels. But everyone aboard was alive. Against impossible odds, in defiance of every safety regulation, the strike force had succeeded and survived. When the ship docked, Captain Valtharax expected to be arrested immediately. Instead, he found the Coalition Fleet Commander waiting at the airlock. Behind the commander stood a delegation from the High Council, the governing body that ruled the entire Galactic Coalition. This could still be a court-martial. It could still be the end of everything. The captain exited first, his armor still scorched from battle. Commander Rixall followed, leaning on a support brace because his leg had been injured when a bulkhead collapsed. Then came the humans. Day, Hana, Quan, and Dr. Nari. They looked exhausted, battered, and completely unashamed of what they had done. The fleet commander stepped forward. He was Velgan, a species that stood even taller than the Vrin, with 4 arms and skin that looked like living crystal. For a long moment, he simply stared at the crew of the Eternal Vigil. Then he knelt in Coalition culture. This gesture was sacred. It was reserved for honoring the fallen or showing respect to those who achieved impossible victory. Around the docking bay, every soldier and officer present followed his example. Hundreds of beings from dozens of species, all kneeling before a crew that had broken every rule to save 50,000 lives. Humans of Earth, the fleet commander said, his voice echoing in the sudden silence. We have been wrong. Profoundly, completely wrong. He stood and gestured for the others to rise. When humanity asked to join the Coalition 20 years ago, we welcomed you. But we did not truly accept you. We classified your species as fragile because you lack natural armor. We called you primitive because your technology was young. We designated you as needing protection because you seemed vulnerable compared to us. The commander walked closer to Day. We did not understand. We looked at your bodies and saw weakness. We should have looked at your world. One of the High Council members stepped forward. She was Vrin, like Captain Valtharax, but older and bearing marks of high rank. Your planet Earth is what we classify as a death world. A place where survival is never guaranteed. Where predators and prey evolved alongside each other. Where adaptation meant life and stagnation meant extinction. She turned to address not just the crew, but everyone present. We come from worlds where evolution was gentle. Our species grew strong through time and peace. We developed slowly, carefully, without pressure. And this made us powerful in some ways. But it also made us rigid. The fleet commander continued. Humans evolved where every day was a battle. You developed creativity because you had to adapt constantly. You perfected cooperation because alone you died. You learned courage because fear without action was fatal. And you gained something we lost millennia ago, the ability to improvise. Dr. Nari spoke up, her voice quiet but clear. You didn't need to change because your worlds were safe. We couldn't afford not to change because ours wasn't. Exactly, the High Council member said. The Coalition's greatest strength has been peace through order. For 300 years, our protocols have protected trillions of lives. But order has made us predictable. The Kresh exploited that. They knew what we would do because we always do the same thing. She looked directly at Day. You bring chaos, but it is not the chaos of destruction. It is the chaos of life itself, of adaptation, of survival. The galaxy is changing, becoming more dangerous. We need species that can change with it. Over the following weeks, the transformation began. It wasn't sudden or dramatic. The Coalition didn't abandon 3 centuries of tradition overnight. But slowly, carefully, they began to incorporate human methods into their military doctrine. Human tactical advisors were assigned to major fleets, not as junior officers who could be ignored, but as strategic specialists whose input carried weight. The tactics Day had demonstrated aggressive positioning, adaptive response, calculated risk-taking were studied in military academies. They called it the Death World Doctrine, and it was taught alongside traditional methods. Humans were reclassified. No longer a protected species, but strategic specialists. The condescending oversight disappeared. When Hannah made engineering suggestions, they were implemented immediately. When Quan proposed new piloting techniques, they were tested and adopted. When Dr. Nari offered medical innovations, they were recognized as coming from a species that had learned medicine in the hardest school possible, a planet trying to kill them. Captain Veltharax was not court-martialed. He was promoted to admiral and given command of the Coalition's rapid response fleet. The mission was simple. Go where protocols fail, where adaptation is needed, where the unexpected becomes routine. It was the perfect assignment for someone who had learned to trust human instincts. He requested that his entire command crew from the Eternal Vigil transfer with him. Every single one accepted. Lieutenant Day was offered a promotion to commander and position as fleet tactical coordinator. He declined the rank but accepted the position. When asked why, he simply said, I didn't do any of this for medals or promotions. I did it because people needed help and I could help them. That hasn't changed. This attitude, prioritizing mission over recognition, became something other species noticed about humans. They didn't fight for glory or honor. They fought because it needed to be done. This made them invaluable in situations where pride or protocol might interfere with effectiveness. 6 months after the battle at Tarak Station, the Eternal Vigil received its new assignment. The ship had been completely rebuilt, incorporating both traditional Coalition technology and new human innovations. It was faster, more adaptable, and held together by engineering that mixed 3 centuries of alien science with human improvisation. The mission brief appeared on Admiral Veltharax's display. The frontier, the most dangerous regions of Coalition space, where threats were unpredictable and backup might be weeks away. Hostile unknown vessels. Potential first contact scenarios. Situations where no protocol existed because no one had encountered them before. By the old standards, it was a death sentence. By the new standards, it was exactly where they were needed. On the bridge, Day sat at his tactical station running combat simulations. Not because he expected a specific threat, but because expecting the unexpected meant staying ready for anything. Hannah was in engineering, making improvements that would horrify a traditional Vrin engineer, but would probably save their lives someday. Quan studied unconventional navigation, routes that official charts called impossible. Dr. Nari prepared first contact protocols that assumed aliens might be hostile rather than diplomatic. Commander Rixal approached Day's station, the first officer who had once dismissed humans as too primitive to understand warfare, now valued their input above almost anyone else's. Lieutenant, the sensor net is showing some unusual readings in Sector 4. Nothing definite, but something that doesn't fit normal patterns. Want me to investigate? No. Rixal's translator captured something that might have been humor. I want you to tell me what you see that I don't. Then I want you to act on it without waiting for permission. Day smiled. That's the most uncoalition thing I've ever heard you say, sir. I learned it from humans. We spent 3 centuries building protocols to keep us safe. You've shown us that sometimes safety means having the courage to abandon the plan. Day studied the sensor data. There was something there. Nothing obvious. Just a pattern that didn't quite fit. The kind of anomaly that coalition protocols would note, analyze, and eventually investigate after proper committee review. But people had died while committees reviewed things. They had learned that lesson well. It could be nothing, he said. But if it's something, waiting to be sure might be too late. Then don't wait, Rixal said. You have tactical authority. Use it. It was strange how much things had changed. 6 months ago, they had needed to break protocols to be heard. Now, breaking protocol was part of his job description. The coalition had learned that having humans who could think outside the rules was valuable only if you actually let them do it. He called up to the Admiral's ready room. Sir, I have something that needs attention. Requesting permission to alter course and investigate. Admiral Veltharak's response came immediately. Granted. And Lieutenant? Stop asking permission for things we hired you to do. If you see something worth investigating, investigate it. That's an order. They couldn't help but grin. Yes, sir. He opened shipwide communications. All hands, we're changing course to investigate a possible contact. It might be nothing. It might be something. Either way, we're going to find out. Quan, plot me a course. Hannah, I'll need engines ready for anything. Dr. Nari, prep medical just in case. Everyone else, stay sharp. The responses came back quickly, each crew member acknowledging without hesitation. Human and alien working together. Not because protocol demanded it, but because they had learned to trust each other through fire and survival.